Thank you for being here, everybody. My name is Asad Beg, and I represent Media Matters for Democracy. It's a Pakistan-based not-for-profit organization which works for media development. And primarily, I'm a broadcast journalist. But for the past year, we have been working extensively on media development and freedom of media-related issues. So we are here for this session. It's a very interesting name, and I'm very I really like the name. It's Big Brother and its corporate twin. And before I introduce the panelists, I really want to just talk about this session. So George Orwell in 1984, some quotes from the book, he said, the Big Brother is watching, and if you really want to keep a secret, you have to hide it from yourself as well. I mean, these are the quotes which ring true now. And with the exception that the proverbial Big Brother now has its corporate twin as well. So extensive amounts of data are being stored in the private information systems, and the security of data, especially when in terms of human rights defenders and their privately stored data in the system, that's still a question. And I think the problem comes in when there is a lack of critical thinking or critical analysis of the potential ill effects of the technologies when they're deployed into humanitarian activities and initiatives. So we are going to talk about that, and I'm going to throw the mic to the panelists for the introduction, starting from the left side. And the way we have planned it, and just very quickly, the way we have planned it, we have 5 minutes for each of the panelists, and we have written down some questions to facilitate the flow of discussions, and we're going to open the floor. We're going to pick your brain on those questions, if it's all right. And then hopefully I'm going to take the notes for it, and we'll see where it goes from there. So starting from you, introduction.
Hi, I'm Taryn Steinbrückner-Kaufman. I'm the executive director of someofus.org, which is a global corporate watchdog. And we are really interested in issues of consumer data privacy and corporate surveillance.
I'm Holmes Wilson. I'm the co-founder of Fight for the Future, which is a campaign organization based here in the United States, best known for its work organizing the protests that defeated SOPA, and in our work on net neutrality as well. And we also work on surveillance reform.
Good afternoon. My name is Jamila Venturini. I'm a researcher at the Center for Technology and Society at Fundação Getúlio Vargas Law School in Rio. The CTS FGV was created in 2003 and has been studying the impact of ICTs in society, cultural aspects, etc.
Hello. I'm Ritu, and I'm working with Digital Empowerment Foundation in India. We've been tackling the issues of access and thinking about how to provide the uniform access without having any surveillance, without having any monitoring and tracking things. So we are also working on a freedom of expression online issues.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I think, Taryn, we should start with you. You have 5 minutes.
So I'm here to talk about what it's like to be a campaigner, a grassroots campaigner around issues of corporate surveillance and consumer data privacy. And I want to start with a problem that we face. So my organization does online campaigning. We start out with petitions. We have, get 100,000 or 200,000 or 300,000 people to take action around a pressing problem that is caused by a corporation usually. And so an example of this for just like a huge story. So that's a campaignable moment, right? In corporate data, there's abuses of consumer data all of the time. And yet very few of those kinds of abuses come out as campaignable moments. And this is something, so like, here's an example. Like I went on a date a couple weeks ago, a blind date through OkCupid, a dating website. And I never gave the guy my name. I never even gave him my first name. And I decided I didn't actually feel that comfortable around him. I didn't want to see him again, but we were already texting. So he had my phone number. I had his phone number. And then a couple days later, Facebook suggested that I become his Facebook friend. And he sent me a friend request, right? I didn't want this guy to know my name. Maybe it was a coincidence. We had 2 Facebook friends in common. Could have just been coincidental timing. But I don't know. Was AT&T sharing my text? Facebook probably has both of our phone numbers, right? Was AT&T sharing my data? Was OkCupid sharing our data? I honestly will never know. And that's the kind of thing that would be a campaignable moment, right? But I will never be able to track why that happened. And so that is a challenge for us as corporate campaigners and as people who aren't issue experts and aren't deep policy people. But we, investigative journalists spend 9 months tracking down these kinds of abuses to publish an article about, how consumer data is being used by banks to in ways that create structural racism in housing, right? And that is campaignable when it comes out, but it's really hard to create. And so that's a challenge that I want to throw out to this audience that I would love to hear about when we get to the audience participation part, to hear any thoughts you guys have about how to create those campaignable moments. Another issue I want to talk about, another question, just as we as campaigners there are avenues that groups like EFF, Fight for the Future in the US, that I've seen around trying to get individual consumers to strengthen their own data privacy practices. So to use HTTPS everywhere, to sign up to a do not track kind of thing, where when you go to a website, EFF has this, where you go to a website, it will only give your data to the website if the website has signed up to EFF's do not track policy. And so there's a tension here between individual level, like, well, we can protect ourselves, we can use LastPass, we can do all these things, versus trying to create a world that actually structurally makes sense, and where we don't have to get everybody to do all these individual things. And so I also wanted to just draw that tension out as campaigners.
Thank you. You've completed before your time, so that's definitely a +1 for you. So yes, Holmes.
Thanks. So yeah, I think there's a few tensions going on here, where the way I look at this is that on the one hand, I mean, government surveillance, the extreme people have no control over or no recourse, and so that's one tension I see. Another one is that within the corporate realm, you have one trend where this data is being irresponsibly collected and amassed in an environment where nobody has any security practices, and there are breaches all the time. And this can bounce back into people's lives in the form of identity theft or severe financial harm or data disclosure in ways that are really, really dangerous. But on the other hand, you have some companies, and it seems to be coming from internal movements of engineers and security communities, actually really doing heroic things to protect privacy that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago, and that to some extent represent huge victories for the privacy and security movement. Specifically, you have the biggest messaging app in the world now, apparently, and we don't know, but it seems to be true, WhatsApp, using end-to-end encryption developed by some of the leading security researchers in the leading open source security app, Signal. And this is coming to a point where Facebook executives, the parent company of WhatsApp, are getting hauled into court and hauled into jail in Brazil because they are unable to provide to Brazilian courts on drug cases that those courts are investigating the contents of messages. So it seems that WhatsApp is doing something very, very significant to protect people's privacy from surveillance. And that is an enormous platform. I mean, it's replacing text messaging, just to give everyone an idea of the scale. And so that tension is there as well. I think finally, another piece of this that's very important to us from campaigning is that the positions that these companies have on policy issues, especially in the jurisdictions in their home countries, could be even more important than the things they do internally in terms of privacy, where we have these legislative fights coming up in the United States around cybersecurity, around the reforms to the Patriot Act, these provisions in the Patriot Act that are scheduled to sunset and need to be renewed. There's an upcoming fight around Section 702, the piece of law that lets the NSA sit on the fiber optic internet backbone and pull in data. The position of America's leading tech companies is extremely relevant to the debate in Congress around those laws. And if we're able to, in some cases, my group has been able to leverage that to get these companies to let's see, we've been able to use consumer and market anxiety about privacy and to use the attention that people are paying to this and the pressure on companies to prove that they are good on privacy to hold those companies to take political stands that they otherwise probably wouldn't have the courage or the reason to take. In one case, quickly, when a number of companies sign on to a letter in support of a cybersecurity bill that had terrible implications for data sharing with the government, we noticed that one of the companies, Salesforce, is the parent company of a company, Heroku, that we actually use to host our website. And so we said, this is terrible. A company that we use for our activism is supporting this. We wrote this dramatic breakup letter with Heroku and said that we were going to leave because your privacy practices are terrible, and this is terrible for all the nonprofits that use Salesforce. Many do. The Salesforce CEO spent a day on Twitter defending defending his company's position on this and saying, no, we just got hauled onto this letter. We didn't know what it meant. We're getting off the letter. They pull off the letter, but not only do they pull off the letter, the trade association that had signed the letter, the Business Software Alliance, pulls off the letter. So several companies, including Apple and others, pull off the letter and say that they are against this cybersecurity legislation. The sad part of the story is we ended up losing because this was very late in the game and the curves just didn't align. So the momentum that we'd shifted in achieving this coup of getting these companies to come out against this law just didn't arrive in time, but it completely turned the tide and it threw the bill's supporters into a last-minute panic. And this is the kind of thing that could be very fruitful in the future, is to make sure that these companies get held to account not just for what their products do, but for where they stand on legislation. And yeah, there's my time.
Thank you, but I think that's a very relatable example, so we can definitely talk about it when it comes to the participants. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm gonna try to touch on two aspects that I think are important for this discussion. We recently finished research about terms of service and privacy policies, analyzing how online platforms treats users' human rights, and one of the aspects that we analyzed were the right to privacy. And it's interesting to see how all these recent debates about mass surveillance and how private companies are cooperating with states in these activities, in the surveillance activities, have made that these policies, apparently, they have pushed companies to be more, at least more, to give more attention to what they are saying on these privacy policies. So we see that they are usually long and detailed, and there is an attempt to give more information about technical issues that might affect the user's rights on one hand. But on the other, it's interesting to see that there is still an attempt to get a general consent from users through a unique document that will try to give, try to have a vague and very expensive language in terms of what they may or may not do, instead of trying to get specific consent for doing specific activities. So that's something that we can see in this type of documents. This is not, this does not mean that companies are not trying or implementing other policies to improve their users' privacy, but when we read the documents, we still see that there is not that much information about what are the implications of certain technologies that are implemented. This is very clear when we talk about tracking and third-party tracking, for instance. We can observe that most companies, we analyzed 50 companies, and most of them, we analyzed 50 platforms, some of them from the same company. But most of these platforms implement tracking technologies and third-party tracking. Most of them also say they may share users' data with others, with third parties, without specifying who are these third parties or why they are sharing this information. Or even when they say why they are sharing this information, they sometimes do not give enough information about, even when they say they might share these for commercial purposes or processing purposes, they still leave some room for other purposes in which they may share this data. This is completely understandable from the company's point of view. They have to have space to operate in this environment and to perform their activities, but maybe there is a way of getting more balance and giving more meaningful information for users. This is something that we could continue discussing. On the other hand, something else I wanted to bring is when we talk about state surveillance and when we talk about developing countries like Brazil, it's very interesting to observe how sometimes there is an international how the international field is important for certain policies or not. So how international discussions are important for certain policies or not. So Brazil is a very recent democracy. Our constitution is from 1988. We have very strong provisions protecting privacy and confidentiality of communications. We have a very balanced law on telephone interception, for instance. But we have some provisions on data protection, on the Consumer Protection Act, and on the Access to Information Act that is very recent, is just from 2011. All these debates have pushed for some developments in terms of legislation for more protections. So you're probably aware of the Marco Civil, the Brazilian Brazilian Bill of Rights for the Internet. And there is a very strong discussion right now about a data protection law that we should adopt soon, hopefully, despite the complicated political environment that we are facing right now. But at the same time, you see things like the adoption of an anti-terrorism law some weeks ago by the Brazilian government. And when you go and see, but why is Brazil talking about terrorism? We have a lot of issues with organized crime. We have a lot of issues with security in general, but we have not discussed terrorism internally that much. It's not something that's particularly concerning in Brazil. But when you go read the justification, part of it comes from a need to attend to some demands from international organization on business and trade that wants that considers that having an anti-terrorism law, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna use part of her minute. That considers that having an anti-terrorism law is important for having a safe environment for business. And this seems to be complicated because you end up pushing for a law that might offer room for certain abuses in terms of freedom of association and freedom of expression. And in a country that has a tradition of an authoritarian regime, and then that still have some important institutions that are committed to abusive practices and etc. So that's something else that maybe we could start thinking about, and that shows how important it is this debate about business and human rights and corporate responsibility with protecting human rights.
Okay, thank you so much. Ritu?
The struggle with the surveillance is not only about the starts with the it's a thought of autonomy, it's a thought about freedom, it's a thought whether we what data has been used and why it has been used. So I'll take the examples of India. In a surveillance in India is unstructured, unorganized, happening by the state and the non-state, both actors. And even the government is allowing its own licensing regime. They have allowed telecom operators to inbuilt some hardware and software to monitor, track, call records, call data, packet monitoring, everything. So and apart from that, the most of global organizations which are tracking our devices and which are offering some kind of interesting services or what they are offering it to us. It looks nice when they are offered, but it really looks very weird as well and very amazing as well that our trends and our usage patterns are monitored, and it monitored as per what we see on what we are scrolling, what we are reading, what we are trying to catch up more news. So what is our new fashion, what is our new trends are coming up. So that's something which if we like one button, the several buttons which come up talking about this is also you can like it, this is also you can interested. How they are tracking our usage patterns, how they are tracking our liking patterns is something which is very difficult to analyze it. It also in India the pattern has also been seen that that most of the government programs has been outsourced to these big corporates and big organizations, which do not have any as a data protection policy. Even if they have it, they are not liable to the government. They are not liable to the state. They are liable to their own state. So how does it make any sense of whether we are liable to the government or we are liable to the corporates? Who is liable? That's something which we need to also explore in this session. While we were making this session as well, we were thinking about what is the target and what is the mass surveillance, which is what we are already targeted by main corporates. It's happening every day, and we do not even realize it. The first time users who are coming up, they are trying to access the services, but they are also being targeted by these corporates. How can we make an ethical approach, or how we can make some kind of a standards that first time users should come online without having monitor?
Thank you. Wow, that's a that's a very good speech. 2 minutes every the time. So what we can do is now we can open the floor if everybody agrees, and we can put some questions out there, and we can see collectively how we can find the answers. Yes.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the great introductions. My name is Alon Bar. I'm writing digital rights. I was curious if any of you have had. Thanks very much. So my name is Alon Bar. I'm with Ranking Digital Rights, and I was curious if any of you have had concrete experience with doing a campaign focused on a specific company or range of companies to change a particular policy or practice of the company, and if so, how that has worked out, or if you've had ideas how to do such a campaign.
Anybody wants to answer that?
So on the first anniversary of the Snowden leaks, we organized my organization organized a campaign called Reset the Net, where the idea was to kind of propose a vision for the future of the internet that would take us in a different direction from what we were discovering, for what we had been discovering for the past year. And specifically, we worked with a few other organizations, including the EFF here in the US, to define a set of recommendations and a set of tools. So the idea of the campaign was twofold. We were going to say, today is a day when every company out there should do one significant thing. It's up to you what that thing is, as long as it's significant. One thing to upgrade your security to be more surveillance resistant. And these series of steps is long and well understood. Moving to SSL, using Start TLS for email, using cert pinning for mobile apps. There's a laundry list, and we worked with security researchers to determine this. The other fork of the campaign was, let's put tools out there that, and this speaks to Taryn's point that earlier, let's put tools out there that give power to individual users to protect themselves from surveillance and don't require that they trust these services, the services providing the tools, because the tools are end-to-end and open source. So we organized a one-day event. Organizations and companies put up a splash page directing users to a download page for 3 tools: TextSecure, which is now Signal, Pigeon OTR Adium, which is a chat client that's encrypted, and Tor. These were tools that we determined to be leading the pack and were very easy to use, reasonably easy to use for people. Someone could start using them rapidly and just get into it and derive value. We got companies like Minecraft to post links in their, the Minecraft, they did a blog post, except the Minecraft blog post appears in the Minecraft app when people turn it on. So my daughter was playing Minecraft, and I got to point in the app and say, here, this is our thing, check it out. And they were distributing tons of downloads of Signal and Tor and Text and Adium for a day. On the other side, on the company side, it was really interesting what happened. We actually, driving downloads was hard, but getting companies to do stuff wasn't that hard at all. It's hard to judge exactly the impact that you had because many of these things were already on the roadmap, and people maybe just pushed it up a bit on the roadmap to meet that day. But one of the things, it's been a little bit of time now, so the list isn't fresh in my head. But one example was a company, SendGrid, which handles email sending backend for thousands of startups, including the services that we use, that our 2 organizations use at least for sending emails. They added a type of protection between email servers that was one of the weakest links in the chain that the NSA had been exploiting to just vacuum up emails in this very, very cheap, very easy way. It didn't secure everything to the highest degree, but it was a huge improvement, and it affected literally thousands of services, including ours, and the numbers of emails they send each day are staggering. So the type of scale we achieved with that campaign was was really incredible. And I think more than anything else, getting that message in everyone's heads that the way we respond to government surveillance should be on the legislative side, it should be in the courts, but it should also be with engineering steps. That message, I think, has been very powerful.
Thank you. So the questions we prepared, I'm just going to narrow them. So the number one is, how should we define corporate surveillance or the corporate abuse of data? Anybody wants to say anything about it? So we can collectively talk with the participants and the panelists. Anybody from the panel want to answer that?
Well, I don't know that I have a whole definition, but I think that corporations that hold personal data about consumers or other, I mean, consumers is the normal, what it could be shareholders, it could be workers, it could be, right? And those people, or it could be that there's it's corporations that where their business model is using that data. So the people aren't even consumers of the company, but it's a financial firm or anyway, the point is corporations who hold data about us as individuals, we should have the right to access, the right to correct, and the right to be forgotten. And I think that corporations that hold data without giving us the right to access, correct, or be forgotten are abusing data.
Thank you. I have an example from Pakistan. If you have 1 minute for that, so we work on ground with journalists to sort of beef up the security. There are many threats to journalists in Pakistan, some from the state actors as well. So we've very recently found out that a corporate in Pakistan who owns 5 big fast food franchises, they have the data, the personal data, the phone numbers, the home addresses, the office addresses, every single piece of information relating to at least 10 or 11 of those people. It's a group of 20 that we are working with. So 11 of them are listed with that sort of corporate. And we've various times in Pakistan, by the way, let me also mention there are no legislative frameworks in place to actually protect the private data and all that. So it's very difficult for people who are working or campaigning for such a sort of privacy of data. It's very difficult to directly deal with the corporate. So I think that also amounts to the corporate surveillance as we're talking about, right? Does anybody want to add something into that?
So the corporate data is not only include the personal data, it includes your personal data, liking patterns, what exactly you are, they're like a watchdog on all the time, and what we are doing it, what we are trying to inbuilt it, it's also the abuse of the data as well. Specifically in India, there's a government has one big program called unique identification, which has all sort of a personal and important data. The program is by the state, but it has been outsourced to maintained by corporate in a name of an efficient manner to maintain that data. But who is owning that data is the question. As is the what and how beyond it can go for abuse that in fact we cannot even measure it. In a second opinion, that the data which is being used by telecom providers, which we never know actually that it's being sold to bank companies, it's being sold to many various companies. User is like sometime like a puppet, and he has been used by getting 50 calls in a day to get those data. We never know that that data has been sold to anyone.
Yeah, and also you cannot ever be sure about the security of this data because it is never stored in a safe environment, secure environment. So moving on. Yes, please start.
I just wanted to say, I thought that was a really powerful description of what you see as data abuse. And by that definition, which the more I think about it, the more I think I agree with, every American company that holds data is abusing that data, right? Because we don't have those rights in the United States. So that was really interesting. Thank you. I wanted to push back a little bit on a dichotomy or the tension that you mentioned, which was, do we try to protect people at broader structural levels, or do we teach them how to protect themselves? And I think that's a false dichotomy. And an example that's been used, I didn't come up with it, is food safety. When we go to a restaurant, we're not expected to test the food for E. coli individually, right? There's certain things that are in place for all of us. And that doesn't mean that if the dish comes out and it smells funny, you should just go ahead and eat it, right? So we do this all the time, and we probably need to start with the structural issues, you know, while teaching all the people not to click on funny smelling emails, right? But we can't rely on individuals protecting themselves. And a second dichotomy that I would push back on is the whole corporate versus governmental surveillance, because as we know with the third-party doctrine, everything that's business data can be easily handed over to the government. So I don't see that as a dichotomy. I see it part of the same surveillance.
I think that's a very important point. Anybody else wants to add into the conversation, or should we move on to the next question? Okay. So what do we know about the current status of corporate surveillance / abuse of data, and what do we need to know but don't know already about the current practices of data gathering and storage and so on?
We don't know the extent of that sort of data collection. A lot of this conversation was generated from the Snowden leaks, and that information is rapidly becoming dated. All of those files that were leaked were timestamped years ago and top secret. So if that was the state of the art a long time ago, what's the state of the art now? So that would be a quick answer.
Just to build on that, I mean, the Snowden leaks taught us a meta thing, which is that, you know, before Snowden, we thought they were doing some stuff. After Snowden, we realized they were doing everything. Every single possible hole or possible bug or possible like failure in the system to secure people's data that you could imagine, the NSA and a few other countries were putting budget behind according to the value of of each opportunity on every level. And so we can just assume that that's what they're still doing, and that where budget can turn flaws in the system into useful data, there is budget and there are people working on it.
Well, that's scary.
I think having seen the inside of both some academic research things, doing work for IARPA, and then also seeing the inside of some corporate stuff here in Silicon Valley, I think we don't know how they're analyzing and whether they're analyzing the data or whether they're just gathering large batches of it, which parts of the data they're analyzing. And that sort of speaks to this, you know, like we don't know, just we have no idea what they're doing with it inside. Like there's a, you know, and I think sometimes what I've found is they're actually doing significantly less than you'd think. But then if they're keeping it around, what will they do with it later, you know? So
I think everything would be the answer. Everything would be the answer. Everything's sort of, yes. Sorry.
This is secondhand, but I was in another conference and one of the security people that spoke said that she had bought a new digital camera. And because of her background, she happened to start looking around and discovered that the well-known company noted that they were downloading all of her, or all pictures that were taken on that particular device, but then it didn't say where it was being downloaded, and it didn't say what they were doing with it, and she was unable to find out. How do you deal with that? You know, I wouldn't have known to look.
Okay, so I think we can move on to the third question. So what strategies have been successful already in pushing back against this abuse, and what hasn't worked?
Properly implemented strong cryptographic systems are one of the few things you can rely on. Using end-to-end crypto, it works, it helps people. Accessibility efforts like the EFF's wonderful Let's Encrypt program is allowing lone wolf sysadmins for lots of NGOs and nonprofits to secure their users. It's not just access to the site. You want to protect people accessing it. For personal communication using tools like Signal or even WhatsApp. WhatsApp is not open source yet, hopefully. I think encryption is a very, very, very strong element in this fight. And that doesn't even address anonymity. I'll let somebody else take that.
Ritu, maybe you want to add something from the perspective of India?
I think that's the one thing which corporate should be in doing it, that what is the consent of using that data, and they should have also asked from the users what are the consent and whether they agree. Talking about the terms of service that we agree upon is not user-friendly language. It's so vague. Sometimes it's so it's so legal that we can't even understand it. So the terms of service language should be also the user friendly, or it should be meaningful to the user, to those who are the first, especially the first time users, which we work with. And the second thing that they should come up with the strategies that they will not provide this data to the government, because some of the very important official human rights data they might pass to the government as well.
Just to add on that, so what we found is also that the terms explicitly say, most of them explicitly say that companies might share users' data without following a legitimate judicial process. And this is particularly complicated because it has to do with something on jurisdiction, as Ritu was also saying, what is a legitimate judicial process is something complicated to understand, and when that's already an abuse. It's something complicated to understand. Talking from not just from an activist point of view, I mean more from a legal point of view, right? So you have a big challenge there in understanding what are the rights and what are the things that apply. And what I was trying to call attention to is that in countries like Brazil, you have very little safeguards on one hand for what the government can do with the users' data, on what companies can do with users' data, and even with which law will apply or how Brazilian law will apply. And this WhatsApp and Facebook case that we see is like, it's very clear how governments are trying to push for companies to apply their laws, and we have a challenge there that we have no answer yet. I mean, that it's possible that this type of things continue to happen more and more. And besides not having safeguards on one hand, we see a lot of attempts of trying to push for more access to data from governments, from democratic governments. Even so, you see here in the US, and we see that in Latin America too, in different countries. So there is a very complicated scenario in that sense. I think something that we have been discussing a lot while discussing this Data Protection Act is related to, first of all, having participatory processes on drafting these laws, and Brazil has tried that in several situations, not just with the Marco Civil, as you all must know, but also with the data protection law. So they did a big consultation that's still going on. So I think it's important that they have feedback, not just from civil society, but also from the industry, because some of the provisions that they are proposing are not even feasible from the business point of view. And I think this is something important, and or not only feasible from the technical point of view. And then you have judges ruling that WhatsApp should give information that they don't have or that they cannot access. And you have this type of tension. And on the other hand, we have been discussing a lot how to have independent oversight on business activities and state activities. We don't have that, and that's a very complicated discussion, but maybe that's a step for us that would be interesting and necessary in giving more safeguards for users.
Yeah, please. Sorry, Darren, you want to go
Yeah,
first?
no, I just wanted to say going back to are you addressing her, or are you doing a different strategy?
I have another response to the same question.
Okay. Yeah, no, so I can't remember his name, but there's the guy in Germany who sued for access to his own Facebook records. Does anyone remember his name? Yeah. So just going back to the question of what strategies have been successful or can be successful. Europe actually has fairly strong laws on the books, much stronger than most of the rest of the world around consumer data protections, but they're not very consistently enforced. And so I think actually there's a strategy that is being underutilized, and that, sorry, I didn't actually catch his name, but yeah, that he's been using, of just trying to force European governments to actually enforce their data privacy laws, and that's a strategy that I think has a lot of fruit still to bear.
I have another sort of different angle, which is that I think we need to think about advertising, and advertising is at the center of this in many ways. First, I think a lot of the harm of most of the data collection that's happening is done for advertising, or it's done by advertising, like literally by the ads that are appearing as a third-party ad in many sites. And let's remember what advertising is, right? On the good side, it's a way for someone with a great product to make sure people know about it. On the other side, it's the same thing that convinced people to start smoking cigarettes, or convinced women to start smoking cigarettes when only men were, or convinced teenagers that acne was ugly and that they should be ashamed of it, that convinced people to drink Coca-Cola, people all around the world to drink Coca-Cola when it's just terrible for you. This is what advertising did. Now, advertising that has this very dark and complicated history, and that isn't really that good for us, is online, and is the reason why all this data is getting collected. It's the reason why Wall Street is just pouring money into data collection of all kinds, even when it doesn't even make economic sense right now, which gets to your point. The data is being collected in some ways just for speculation. It's the reason why many sites aren't using SSL, because the ad networks, because one of the 30 different ad systems that they use doesn't support SSL, the secure link for websites. So they can't use it because they would lose a little bit of advertising money, and it's not worth it. And you know, and then we have a weapon against this, which it's also kind of the tip of the spear, where it's in many ways the way we suffer from data collection is when someone uses data to trick us into paying for something we don't need, or making a choice in the market that isn't in our interest. Because advertising has that side too, and I think we should be really clear about that. Or when people are encouraged to download an app that's going to cost them $10 a month because they get addicted to playing it, right? You know, in the case of the new generation of mobile games. So if we try to cut ourselves, and especially our children, off from advertising as much as possible, using whatever tools are on the table, whether it's providing them with ad-free access to video, or providing ourselves with ad blockers in our browser, we're fighting a war against ads. And if we spread this meme, I think we're creating a world where this data becomes much less valuable, and the harm that's caused by the collection of it becomes less present.
Yes. Sorry.
Right now, and I think that should tell all the rest of us something. But there's also, well, never mind. I'll leave it at that.
We have one there behind you. Sorry.
The downside of hitting up on advertising, of course, is we're all being reminded by many of our favorite news sites right now, is that you really lose journalism, right? Like that's why we lost newspapers in the 90s, that's why we're losing, or why you know, various sites are complaining about it now. So, I mean, part of the campaign that would have to happen there is getting people to realize that, you know, once again, if you're not paying for it, you are the product. Somebody has to pay for it somewhere, and then we have to actually pony up, you know, for when we can. And then there are issues of who can pony up, who can't, and who gets different access there. I mean, I'm completely on your side about this as somebody whose core interest in life is media literacy, but there's a huge set of things that we need to do. And once again, also, like, just to note, within education, it's very hard to convince people to pay for media literacy too. It's not a thing that's happening.
I think we had one there, sir.
I just wanted to echo your point about, you brought up a lot of great points on ad blocking, and that's a sensitive subject for a lot of people, especially if you work in journalism and media. You're sensitive to that revenue stream. Working in security, I do absolutely use an ad blocker. Make your own decision, but I also don't know any security professionals who do not. So you listed a lot of bad things about advertising, lack of SSL support, things like that. Also, it is a wonderful vector for malware. If you want to infect lots of people, and you can just register a new fake company, and your malware is served up on CNN.com. Look at Forbes, has a terrible track record, just to call out one famous media org. So from a security standpoint, there's a really, really, really big reason that we should all push back against the role advertising has in shaping what we read on the internet.
And one quick answer to your question, I think, is that to some extent the ad market is a market that people who need advertising will find their way into and pay for. And so I think there is a potential scenario where consumers, in pushing back against certain types of advertising, leave space open for advertising that's done ethically, and then the market is left with only that as an option to reach consumers and pays for it. You know, AdBlock Plus by default right now lets some ads through, and they do that because they want to change the way advertising is done. So the default setting in AdBlock Plus is that there's ethical ads, and sites that comply with a list of restrictions will have their advertising displayed and won't be their revenue models won't be disrupted. So that's a potential strategy there. I don't think it's complete, but it's one way to go.
Yes, and then we move on to the next question.
The use of the data, not just for ads, I call it kind of like the tertiary use, is also really unknown, such as one of the cities here in California is using essentially data that's been gathered by, I want to say Experian, to code the threat. So people are graded A, B, or C. And that's your purchasing habits, as well as your home and other data. So it's not just ads, it's that tertiary use. And legislative hearings, FTC, trying to find out from these data aggregators, who are your customers? They're not being told. They're asking on our behalf, but they're not being told. The companies are refusing. So there's a problem. We don't have a solution yet.
Should I just narrate the question because it deals with like she was saying about the solutions. So what are those recommendations that we can talk about? I'm sorry. What are those recommendations that we can talk about to improve the data protection of consumers in these corporate culture? You wanted to say something?
So maybe this doesn't answer or isn't relevant to the question you just asked, but I think that we need to reframe the ad blocking debate, right? There's an ads versus content, right? And we need to reframe it as tracking versus not tracking,
Yes.
right? Ads can be okay if they're not invading your privacy. They can still also be a form of psychological warfare, but that's maybe a separate issue which we need to address separately, right? And the important issue right now is ads that are tracking what you read and tracking your buying habits, right? And I think that we can actually use these to tell stories about why data collection is bad, right? When these are affecting people in very serious ways. I think when we find those cases, right? Like, for example, when Target informed a woman's dad that she was pregnant before even she knew, right? I think that we can use those sorts of stories to inform, to make the case to the public, essentially, that big data can be harmful to them.
And I would just say on that, I think the Target pregnancy story is exactly the kind of campaignable moment that I was speaking of at the beginning.
Yeah.
And the problem is they're actually pretty few and far between in this realm because it's very rare it's very common that we have experiences because of corporate tracking. It's very rare that we know for sure that that's why we're having the experience. And that is a really important nut to crack, I would say, as a campaigner.
Sorry, there I see a hand.
On the campaignable moments thing, so I'm a journalist from Iran originally, and I worked on a few stories of, really crazy, like a series of really crazy cases. Think about a person who shows up to Alcoholics Anonymous with a lot of, concentration, and then finds out the people on AA suggested him as friends to Facebook after a while. Think about someone who is just about to get married but has doubts, but then starts getting weird things. And we ran a few stories both in Iranian media and the others. But my question is, when you talk about the campaignable moments, then what are some specific things in the United States and Britain, which have similar laws, that can be done? Because I think in the next year, there will be a lot of moments like this, and there are plans on some big money organizations to gather. But what are some of the specific actions that, basically can be done? Because then we can link that into as part of our journalism. Basically.
You mean to create the campaignable moments?
Basically to push them, to push the moments after we have them toward a specific goals.
Yeah, I mean, I would love anybody who has campaignable moments around corporate surveillance and consumer data. My organization would love to be in the loop and to have them, we can embargo them and then run a campaign at the same time they're released to the media. So that's something I would love to be doing myself. We have 11 million people who've taken action through our website and 500,000 every month. So I think another thing that comes to mind around creating campaignable moments is, and I don't, maybe somebody out there is already doing this, but I feel like I would love to just have a super legalistic person who just very detail oriented, just reading all the terms of service of the top 500 websites in the world every time they're updated. And because I think you can create campaignable moments out of those, and sometimes we see them, but I think that we're missing a lot of them as well.
I think that's a very relatable point. You want to say something?
Yeah, in terms of finding campaignable moments, a lot of a theme that sort of feels like it's coming up for me is, are we talking to a broad enough group of people? My boss and I at Simply Secure recently went and spoke, did some sort of need finding in low-income communities in New York, and the ways that we found they were using branded apps. So, for example, from Dunkin' Donuts, blew our mind because we didn't know anybody who were using things like that. But I think if you get out there and talk about, like we said, we only know people who use ad block. I never see an ad. I have no idea what we're talking about with ads online. But there are people out there who experience them a lot more than we do. And I feel like if we go and just have conversations with them, that'll help. On the other side of conversations, thinking about strategy, we were just in the other room talking about, cross-pollination with people who are doing cybersecurity things, making sure they understand human rights. Same thing here. How much do we actually talk to advertisers? We are not hearing, as far as I know, there are no advertisers here at RightsCon. Plenty of tech folks, from the industry, but it feels like we should get advertisers in on the discussion too, because they need to hear from us. They live in a really strange, different world, as far as I can tell. And another possible thing, I have my media literacy show. We tried to do this. Ad leaks. What if you had a place for people within the ad industry to come out and be like, they're doing some shady shit here. I'd like you all to know about it. So, yeah, we tried doing it with puppets. You may want to try something else.
Yes. Last comment, and then we can wrap up. Yes.
We all need to push back also on the fiction of anonymized data. And I don't mean the whole de-anonymization debate, but I mean the fiction that just because they take your name off, but they know that a person who looks just like you, who lives in your house, who has that family, they know everything about you, but then they claim that the data is anonymous. And that's something that we need to educate people around, because otherwise it sounds like, okay, it's taken care of, right? That's presented as one of the solutions always. So we need to push back on that now before more people think that it's a solution.
I think you wanted to say something. I'm sorry. Okay. Excellent. Thank you so much. I think we've ran out of time, but great discussion. And I believe it's only the start of it, because it's impossible to discuss all of this in just 1 hour. But I think one obvious thing that has came out among many in the session is to perfectly understand the terms of service for a lot of corporates, which are right there. But the problem is that it's so difficult to read and understand that it's very, very difficult for an ordinary consumer or user to comprehend it. So I think if it's one of the things that probably people like you or the organizations like you are working on something like this can work on, I think it can be equally good for countries like Pakistan and India as well, who are in the developing stages, and they're still trying to understand the data protection mechanisms around the world and so on. And with that, thank you so much. Oh, yes.
Just very quickly, I would like to, first of all, invite you to take a look at the report we did on terms of service and human rights. I will give you some for the ones that are interested in it. And just not to lose this conversation that we were having, and again, to say something that's kind of different that we were talking about. I think there is an important discussion about education and the role of education and schools in discussing this type of stuff. And there are a lot of policies trying to push for technologies in education, and you see little of this debate in these spaces too, because usually we do not talk. Here we are talking about digital rights, and when we are in education discussions, they are talking about how technology is good and it's neutral, and you should use it. And we are having a lot of movements in tailored content for students and things like that, and student privacy. And I think this is a debate we should start having too. That's all, just to.
Thank you. And I would like to thank some of us and the Digital Empowerment Foundation for hosting the session. Thank you so much.